Thanks, Matt. I'm going to now turn it over to John Popovich. Oh, okay. All right, so we go from a first-time presenter to a long-time presenter, and John, I have yeah. Somebody just said here, Justin McKinney said, had no idea how fascinating Devlin was, and he is really fascinating, which is and you made it that way. Okay, so John, I think Bob will ask you to maximize your screen. I see your slide up. There you go. And
do you guys hear do you have my audio?
Yes, we do. We have your audio. We have
okay,
you. We have your visual. We have your audio, and we're all set.
Time to go.
John Popovich, okay, presenting on G.L. Werth and the growth of Reconstruction era baseball in Montgomery, Alabama, 1865, 1875. Tremendously interesting period in American history.
Thank you, Peter. So some of you might recall from a couple of years ago, I actually did a presentation that combined information regarding Harrison Harwood of Natick, Massachusetts, as well as Peck and Snyder out of New York. And it was a presentation all about the heavy hitters in 19th century sporting goods. As part of that presentation, I utilized, I don't want to call it a prop, but I utilized an item that I've had for quite a while, and some of you might have actually seen it before. I think it's actually even on Eric's 19th Century Baseball website, and it's a sales invoice on Harwood Billhead, and it reflects a purchase made in March of 1871. Now, I had purchased this sales receipt simply because of the great graphics and the baseball content, but I never looked past the bats and balls to determine, you know, who the buyer might have been and why did they purchase this volume of baseball goods. I'm not going to read all the numbers there, but if you just look down to the bottom line is in current dollars is nearly $5,000 worth of balls and bats purchased by this individual in March of 1871. So when I finally decided to go ahead and look into who he might have been, and the who I'm referring to is circled there in red, a Mr. G.L. Werth. I really did. I truly thought I'd find out that he was some retail agent from somewhere in the New England area, simply purchasing stock from the manufacturer to resale somewhere in the community that he lived or worked. Well, it turned out I was completely off base in my assumption. And in pursuing more information about Werth, I stumbled into an exploration of the birth of baseball in Alabama, and more specifically, the roots of the game in Montgomery, which would become the state's baseball epicenter. Now, this here is G.L. Werth. This is the Mr. G.L. Werth that you see, whose name was on top of the sales invoice. Now, he was anything but a New England merchant reselling all these baseball goods. So you can see here, he lived a very, very interesting life even prior to the date of that sales invoice. He was born to German missionaries in Malaysia in 1838, moving to the United States with his family in 1849, settling in St. Louis. He's college educated with a degree in engineering, and of course, he served in the Union Army in 1861, served with the Company G of the 1st Missouri Engineers. He was cited to be a very successful and capable officer who saw action in Mississippi, Tennessee, and of course, Alabama between 1861 and 1864. At war's end, he relocated and established himself as a shoe merchant in Montgomery, Alabama. And he began being listed in the city directories as early as 1865. So what you see here is an image of Montgomery, Alabama, looking down Market Street toward the state capitol, right around 1865 or so. That's an ad for G.L. Werth's shop. And from what I can tell, just from going up and down Market Street over the course of the research here, I think the shop there with the boot on it, which is on the left-hand side of Market Street, you can see it in the main image, but certainly there in the blow-up. I think that is Werth's shoe and boot shop located at 25 Market Street in Montgomery. So it really would seem as though Werth fully immersed himself in business, society, and culture from the moment he set up shop in Montgomery in 1865. We see here all of the organizations he involved himself with, as well as the initiatives he helped to launch. If it was something that could be joined, it seems as though Werth was doing it. Despite his service in the Union Army, he became instrumental in organizing the Confederate Monument Committee in Montgomery. He was the chairman, in fact, of that committee. He was integral in setting up the state fairs in Montgomery. He was selected for the Alabama delegation to the World's Fair in Chicago. His wife, Louise, was a nationally recognized figure in women's suffrage. So he was absolutely civic-minded, culturally immersed socialite who was well-known and well-respected. But what's the connection to baseball? Well, for that, we've got to look at the birth of baseball in Montgomery, Alabama. We have to kind of go backwards to go forwards. The history of baseball in Alabama was that there really was no history of baseball in Alabama prior to 1865. We have some accounts of a diary telling of town ball being played in Alabama in the 1850s, and a paper in Troy reran an article from Porter's in 1856 talking about the concept and rules of baseball. There's a few scant accounts of soldiers of both armies having played baseball while campaigning in Alabama, but there's no evidence of any organized baseball teams or clubs in Alabama before or during the Civil War. The first team established was the Dramatics Baseball Club of Mobile in 1865, and we know that from the article here in the Weekly State Sentinel that was published in 1868. And now it makes sense that the first city in Alabama to have a team was Mobile. From Tom Gilbert's wonderful book, I learned that baseball travels really well by train and by ship, and Mobile happens to be a port city in Alabama, the biggest port city in Alabama. So the the Dramatics, remained the only organized team on record in Alabama for the balance of 1866, per the newspaper accounts. So what of the establishment of baseball in Montgomery itself? Well, the first actual reference of baseball in Montgomery appears in a Montgomery paper in 1865. And really, it's a piece in the Montgomery Advertiser asking the young gentlemen of the city to join with the other southern cities in forming teams. It's more of a challenge or even a demand than a request. And it calls for the outright and immediate establishment of an association of baseball players. It cites the New York Clipper as the place to go and write for sets of rules, and suggests that equipment for baseball playing could be readily procured within a 2-week period. Still, despite this demand for baseball clubs in Montgomery in 1865, there's no reference to any teams in the city of Montgomery, Alabama through all of 1866. Now that change comes in 1867. The first 3 clubs in Montgomery are established in May of 1867, and they're done so with the pleasure and full support of the local paper. Interestingly, the clubs are formed and begin to play at the very same month that the Congressional Reconstruction process began in Alabama, which was also the first of the southern states to begin that process. And those 3 teams, as you can see, are the Montgomery 9, organized on the 1st of May, 1867, the Pelham Club, organized a week later on the 9th, and somewhere in the middle of May, the Mary 9 Baseball Club was established again in May of 1867. So we have the Montgomery 9 Baseball Club, and within 1 month of formation, we begin to get accounts of the city's first club's practices, their many improvements, as well as their challenges of other clubs in Montgomery. Again, the papers are just not in the area of Montgomery, but also throughout different parts of Alabama. And they're eagerly covering the new baseball activities that are starting in the Montgomery area. The second team that was established just a week after the Montgomery 9 was the Pelham Club. They were also very active throughout their inaugural spring season. But what's most interesting about this club, given the fact that they'd only been around for a month, is their namesake, John Pelham. It would be an understatement to say that Major John Pelham was just a favorite son of Alabama. This individual was in school at West Point when he left in 1861 to join the Confederate Army, and he came to be recognized as one of the most effective adversaries of the Union Army in all of the Civil War. He was an artillery officer and served with Jeb Stuart's cavalry, basically writing the book on the employment of mobile horse artillery. He was killed in action in Virginia in 1863 and only gained in status after that. There are numerous monuments to Pelham throughout the South in Alabama, Virginia, and in Louisiana. And there was even an artillery base used by the 1st Cavalry Division on the DMZ in Korea in the 1970s and 80s that was named after him. He was so well known and respected in Civil War circles that when his family found and auctioned off this image of him in 2010, it sold for $41,800. So while the Pelham Club may not yet have made much of a name for themselves in 1867, their namesake surely had. So we moved from no baseball at all in Montgomery in 1866 to all sorts of buzz surrounding the game by the spring of 1867. We see here that the Montgomery Advertiser is again touting the organization of the baseball club, having it now being the new order of things. And again, just reinforcing the idea that they didn't exist before the Civil War. They were not thought of before the war in Montgomery. Now they're all the rage with the young men. And from the Montgomery State Sentinel in June of 1867, we see it list, we see baseball being named as a great source of gratification to see all these young men attaching themselves to the different clubs of the city. Here we have an early meeting just after a month of their establishment, an early meeting between the Montgomery Nine versus the Pelham Club. And what's interesting is, might there have been some influence that generated the growth in Montgomery? There has to be, just like there is with anything. Something had to have influenced it. Even though it was the bastion of the Deep South and the first capital of Confederacy, where might some of this influence for baseball in this area come from? And of course, we look to New York for that. This game was umpired by Mr. Jacoby of the Manhattan Club of New York. But it's not the only influence that New York might have had on the development of the game in Montgomery here in 1867. For that, we're going to go ahead and take a look at a very obvious and significant example, that being Alec Pearsall. It's not coincidental or can be overlooked that Pearsall was born in Alabama. We all know his story of moving to New York, studying medicine at Columbia, and of course playing with the Excelsiors from 1858 to 1862. Pearsall did join the Confederate Army in 1862, certainly putting on the outs with the Excelsior Club. And he was given a commission as a surgeon in the Confederate Army, serving in the Army of Northern Virginia. At war's end, he relocated to Montgomery and set up a very, very successful medical practice and continue to play baseball. There is evidence that he played for both the Montgomery Nine and the Pelhams over a period of time. And we can see here some articles pulled from local newspapers at the time, 1862 from 1868 and another from 75 that speak to Dr. Pearsall's baseball playing days in New York. So when Pearsall resumed his baseball activity in Montgomery, like I said, he also set up a practice a couple of doors down from the shop of, guess who, Mr. G.L. Werth, who by this time had to be very much aware of the growing interest and importance of baseball in the community. If Werth wasn't yet aware of it on his own, he and all of the community would be when the Closing of Doors Act was implemented in May of 1867. Now, it's more a decision than it wasn't an outright act. But it was such that even within 1 month since the establishment of the first few teams in the city, we already see a formal arrangement between the city's employees and their merchant bosses to allow for the closing of businesses at 5 p.m. in order to allow all of the employees time to play baseball. Again, it looks as if the local papers fully supported this action, even if some members of the community may not have. The article there on the left of the Montgomery Advertiser is an individual talking about how some of the old men of the city really liked having a place to go and spend time in the evenings. And now that the doors were closing for the young men to go play baseball, the old men wouldn't have anywhere to go and sit. I guess such was the plight of these older gentlemen in a city where baseball was the hottest thing going. So who were some of these merchants and businesses that existed at this time, and where does Werth fit in there? So a couple of the significant ones that we can't imagine Werth not having had interactions and relationships with were that of course, Dr. Pearsall and another individual by the name of R.W. Offutt, Bob Offutt. Now, Bob Offutt ran a bookstore, and of course, Pearsall was a doctor. Both of them had storefronts that were within feet of G.L. Werth's shop on Market Street. You could see Offutt's shop, he was a member of the Pastime Club. He was right next door to Werth, and Dr. Pearsall had his shop just a few storefronts down. So we can surmise that G.L. Werth, while not yet involved per se in baseball, was certainly gaining in knowledge and awareness of the baseball being played in the community. So we're able to see the obvious interest and enthusiasm for the arrival of baseball to Montgomery in 1867. It's all over the place in the papers. And this article from May of 1868 just doubles down on it. I'll read just the bottom part, but it's as strong a message of support for baseball in the community as I've read anywhere in any community at any time. The bottom part says, what the Olympic Games were for the ancients, what cricket is for merry old England, such is baseball for America, only more so because it is a better game than either of them. Baseball is a permanent institution, and if we cannot say that our fathers played it before us, we can at least boldly assert that our children will play it after us. And I think that is certainly the message put forth by the Montgomery papers at that time. They were all in with the game of baseball within just a year and a half of it first appearing in the city. Another thing we're also seeing mention of is how baseball itself is a bit of an ointment for the wounds of the Reconstruction process that were going on in Montgomery at the time. And how by 1868, Montgomery becomes ground zero for the game of baseball in Alabama itself. Those two articles there to the right, they mention just the political troubles and the depression and hard times that were going on in Montgomery during this period, and how baseball was a part of providing some respite from that. So like I said, by 1868, Montgomery, Alabama becomes the epicenter for baseball in that state. The first annual convention of baseball players in Alabama was held there in April of 1868. It continued in 2 to 3 day blocks for the balance of 1868. 12 clubs from Alabama were invited and involved and accepted into the association. They adopted the rules and standards of the National Association of Baseball Players, and there you can see a very nice letter from the association to the folks in Alabama, and almost an invitation and congratulations on their own association, and offering as any and all help that they could to help further the game in that area. So here is a map of Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama from 1887. I'm just a big fan of maps, and if I can get one into a presentation, I generally will. So this is, while it's somewhat after the period of time that we're talking about, it does in a blown up area show us some very important parts of the city. The red line that you see there going from right to left, or east to west, I guess, to cross the stream, is on Market Street. The name of the street had changed to Dexter by the time of 1887, but that is Market Street, the Market Street that G.L. Werth had his shop on, that Dr. Alec Pearsall had his practice on. And it is also there in that red circle there to the right. That is also the hotel that the first convention in 1868 was held in Alabama. The State House is on the other end of Market Street. And if you follow the red line south down from Market Street, that's Perry Street. The Perry Street grounds is where all the baseball in Montgomery was played. Again, here in 1887, it looked somewhat different. There were rail yards there, but before that, that is where the teams like the Montgomery Nine, the Pelhams, the Pastimes, the Mary Nine would all gather to play their matches. So we've looked at a lot at the establishment of baseball in Montgomery, but we need to get back to G.L. Werth himself and what role he played in the process. Again, remember, this was all born out of the fact that his name was simply penned to the top of an invoice. And how does he fit into this whole thing? Beginning in 1870, we now start to see references in the Montgomery papers of Werth in association to baseball itself. At this time, right around 1870, he begins to retail baseball goods of every description, as you can see there, out of his boot and shoe shop on Market Street. He was also involved in the awarding of the championship silver balls for local teams. We see that in an article there from the Montgomery Advertiser in August of 1870. In addition to adding baseball supplies to his shop's inventory and providing those trophy balls, we now see him selling tickets to the state championships match. References to Werth as it relates to baseball matters are increasing throughout the year of 1870. And the timing here in 1870 is no coincidence. Whereas there was an abundance of material on Werth in his shop beginning in 1865, we don't see it, baseball, referenced in relation to him until 1870. But when we do, again, that timing is not only convenient, it makes complete sense when we get into what we see here next. So we know Werth is firmly established in Montgomery, is economic, social, educational, and cultural circles by 1870. We know he's been involved in the organization of the Alabama State and Agricultural Fairs held back beginning in 1868. Now, he was involved in the planning of all the state fairs, and the 1870 state fair just happens to feature a baseball game between the New York Mutuals and a pick nines from the Alabama teams. So he was instrumental in putting these fairs together. So there's really no doubt that G.L. Werth is recognizing the growth of baseball in Montgomery at this time and the positive impact it's having during the ongoing Reconstruction process. These state fairs, just like state fairs now, particularly down south, were huge deals. And having the Mutuals come to play a team from Alabama was surely a very big deal at that time. In 1871, baseball in Montgomery is going to take another step forward, and the evidence of Werth's involvement now becomes much more pronounced. Okay, so we are back to the invoice. We're back to the sales receipt from March of 1871, when G.L. Werth, who I thought was some purveyor of, or agent of sporting goods in New England, purchased all of these goods from the Harwood and Sons of Natick, Massachusetts. So he makes that purchase for baseball goods, again, in today's dollars, about $5 grand. But why and what for? Again, going from Natick, Massachusetts, a purchase from Montgomery, Alabama, it certainly raised the question for me, why and what for? That's an awful lot of baseball goods. What would somebody as tied into the local goings-on as Werth know about the events planned in Montgomery for 1871? Well, in 1871, Montgomery hosted the championship of all the southern states in August of 71 on the association grounds, again on the foot of Perry Street that we took a look at there on the map. This was a month-long tournament that, from what I could gather, it really seemed to be a round robin in nature. This grand championship of the South involved 31 teams from 7 states to include Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, Texas, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Georgia. Visiting teams would receive half of the net receipts, and a silver ball and bat would be awarded for the championship. Someone had to furnish this significant event. And again, as I start to piece, all the evidence together, it seems to me that $5,000 worth of balls, bats, and gear would have gone a long way to resourcing an event as significant and as large as this in 1871. Now, again, just because I like maps and I also like pictures of old ball players, not that this is an image from any one player or players that took part in the 1871 championship, but it is a bit of a rarity given the lack of images depicting baseball players from the Deep South at this time. To my knowledge, and I looked around a little bit, I think this is the only known CDV from, that depicts players from Alabama. And I certainly just wanted to add it to the presentation because period wise, it could very well be from right around that time of the early 1870s. And of course, there's the Market Street connection once again. The photographer who created this image was located just a few doors down from G.L. Werth's shop on Market Street. Again, Werth was located at 25. Bob Offit of the Pastime Club was located at 24. Dr. Pearsall was there, and so was this photographer. So Market Street, again, being really the epicenter of life in Montgomery, Alabama, but certainly maybe baseball as well. By 1874, we have some confirmation that Werth was somewhat more than just a goods and a well-meaning supporter of the game in the Montgomery community. This tongue-in-cheek article out of Troy, Alabama, and Troy was a rival baseball city of Montgomery at this time, so that might inform some of this. We see details that a new club in Montgomery has been formed and named after G.L. Werth. So now, not only was he selling goods, selling tickets, providing championship bats, silver championship bats and balls for these games, by 1874, he's gained enough either notoriety, traction, or influence to have a team named in his honor. And there's no evidence that I could find that Werth himself played baseball at all. So what we see here throughout 1874, we've seen an abundance of references, and here these are just a few of the newly formed Werth Club, to include a detailed description of their new uniforms, white caps with white visor and red star. May not really be a star, but it's close enough for the graphic I could find. And they had red and white striped socks. So pretty dapper appearance for the Werth Club. There's tons of information, tons of articles of them and excerpts of them challenging other teams, playing other teams, winning, losing, all throughout 1874. This article here on the left is from the Nashville Union, obviously from Tennessee in 1874. Speaking to the Werth's travels with the team, he went with them to play this game in Nashville, and it identified him as a clever and courteous gentleman with genuine interest for the game. Again, he's credited with providing a silver ball and bat for the state championship, the article on the upper right. And now we even see the Montgomery baseball grounds on the foot of Perry Street being named after him. Before it was, the old grounds on Perry Street, but beginning in 1874, the grounds become the Werth's grounds going forward, and not just the Werth's grounds, meaning the Werth Baseball Club's grounds, interchangeable for the day they were playing, but as Werth's grounds going forward. So we know that from all this, born from this sales receipt, that G.L. Werth was surely an influential social, commercial, and cultural figure who did play a role in moving baseball forward in Montgomery during the Reconstruction era. Moreover, the history of baseball in Montgomery itself is significant. What began there in 1867 spread throughout the state and made that city the hub of the game for much of the Deep South. But what I really want the takeaway to be here is how I stumbled onto this topic in the first place. And I do mean stumbled. If not for the name, a simple name, penned to the top of that sales invoice from 1871, I would never, ever have looked in this direction in the history of baseball in Montgomery, to a large extent, not that I discovered it, but might still be lingering in the shadows. I hope it serves just as a reminder and reinforcement that the spark for 19th century baseball research can literally come from anywhere at any time. And what relics are out there, still holding the clues to more exploration and research? The answer, I'm certain, as John so eloquently stated earlier today, the answer to that is I am certain. There's much more still out there, and more than I could certainly imagine. I want to thank all of you for your time and attention and hopefully interest. And while I wish we were all on our way now to get some drinks and on to Templeton Hall for dinner, I hope all of you have a great year and look forward to seeing you back at the Fred in Cooperstown in 2022.
John, another fascinating presentation. I don't know what else to say. I see that my screen's lighting up with some congratulatory notes to you on our chat spot. A couple of items that came in while you were talking.
Mhm.
One was one I think you just answered. One was a question about, how did you get started in this particular field, on this particular research involving work. And I think you just answered that. But that same questioner asks, where did you get most of the newspapers that you cited there? Were they online?
I've had an education in newspapers over the last year or two. Even after I put this whole presentation together, as you know, Peter, it was supposed to be presented at last year's Fred. So even over this past year, I've identified, not unlike anybody else here, that all the innumerable resources and repositories for archived newspapers that exist all over the place. So, I mean, this began with a simple newspaper, newspapers.com subscription. But even over this past year, in researching other presentations that I hope to get out there in the not too distant future. I mean, even just stumbling across, and I stumbled across it. I'm sure many of you have known about it for years. The New York Clipper archives at the University of Illinois, and some of the other places that are just a treasure trove of research material. But most of these, the papers that went into researching this presentation, I was lucky, were on a newspapers.com.
Tom Gilbert comments that Pearsall's parents were native to upstate New York. And by the way, he thought it was a great presentation also. And he also notes that Pearsall generally hid his Southern identity to hide why he really fought in the Confederate Army. So maybe that you and he should have that discussion, because maybe Tom knows something more about that.
He certainly does. I mean, Tom's book and the portions on it that cover Pearsall were amazing. I was privy to them certainly after this presentation was put together, but it really helped to inform me more about Pearsall and what influence he might have had in Montgomery baseball circles at that time. But a fascinating character, and anybody who has not yet looked at read Tom's book, How Baseball Happened, please do yourselves a major favor and get your hands on it.
Two more items here. Peter Morris notes that Pearsall's father ran a newspaper in Owego, New York, and and Pete notes not to be confused with Oswego. It is Owego, and I know the difference. I spent a little time going to Owego when my daughter was at school upstate New York. And one other thing, Jake puts a note in here. There's a book out, a recent book, called A Place Worse Than Hell. And it's it's by John Matheson, and it talks quite a bit about Pelham, which is very interesting. Well,
yeah, Pelham is a fascinating, and again, there's a complete aside, but Pelham was in military circles, which, as you know, Peter, is close to my heart as an artillery officer myself. Pelham was a genius. He was like a boy genius in terms of the employment and utilization of artillery during the Civil War. And his fame only got bigger with his passing. When he was killed in action in Virginia.
Right, a true American tragedy, right? Well, it is just. Thank you so much, John.
And real quick, I think that was Craig, asked what GL stood for. Yes, GL. His parents were German immigrants. G is for Gotthold. His name was Gotthold Louis Werth.
Wow, that's a mouthful. Well, thank you very much again, John. You did a wonderful job as usual.
Thank you. It was fun, Peter. Thank you all.
Bob and I are going to reopen this again with Jacob's help. He's going to be sending an email tomorrow morning early that you all should receive. That will put you on to our final day of the thread. It is a great day lined up. You're going to see Jack Bales again, who was on our panel. He'll be doing a presentation on Holbert, particularly about his early years disassembling the Chicago team before the creation of the National League. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then you're going to really feel like you're in Cooperstown, because we have Jim Gates as our next speaker. We'll be doing a special presentation on our sheet music collection that the Hall of Fame recently acquired. It was actually Penny Marshall's collection. And he'll be talking about presenting some of that collection, particularly the 19th century music, sheet music. Then we're going to go over to Lauren Tuiskula, who is also a new presenter at the Fred. But she has one of my, I'm glad the judges picked this, because she's going to be talking about Frank Bancroft and the Blackstone Valley 19th century baseball legacy. And that's in the area between Worcester and Providence, Worcester, Mass. And Providence, Rhode Island. Then Larry Phillips is going to be giving do a talk on the beginnings of baseball in Cincinnati. And then we're going to have Bob Bailey interviewing Tom Gilbert. And then finally, Justin McKinney is going to be batting cleanup with a very interesting topic called Seasons on the Brink, the finances of the season on the brink, the finances of the Union Association. So that should be very interesting.
You skipped Chris Jones.
I'm sorry, say that?
You skipped Chris Jones.
Oh, I did. I'm sorry. Yes. Oh, yes. Thanks, Bob. See, Bob is my back. Yes, and Chris Jones is going to be presenting before Justin. I went right over his own. And Chris will be talking about Wolverines versus Wildcat Stand, a battle over barn top bleachers. And that, of course, is about the Detroit Wolverines and that era. I'm sorry, Chris. Okay. Bob, any closing comments?
No, I just hope everyone had a good day, and we hope to have another one tomorrow.
Okay. So do I, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Again, we'll be live at about 11:45 a.m. Eastern time. So all you folks in the other time zones, just, consider that as what your local time is. All right. Thank you all again, and it's greatly appreciated, all your participation. Thank you.